Welcome back to part 2 of making an American Wavy flag epoxy inlay, 5-color inlay. If you missed part 1, you probably want to go back and look at that. I'll put a video card in the corner, and I'll also put a link in the video description so you can go see that. In part 1, we covered everything necessary to create the toolpaths. So we broke the vectors up into layers, and we talked about how we were going to use those layers. And we went into real detail on each part of that process of defining proper overlap, going over overlap fundamentals, and why we were setting the layers up and the overlap the way we were. That took about an hour. So then we come into this video, and now this video is going to take all the work that we did from before. So if you haven't seen that, that's why I say you might want to go look at that. And we're going to apply all of that overlap work and put everything into various toolpaths and then cut the toolpath and then pour the epoxy color by color. This video also takes between 45 to 60 minutes. One of the things about my videos is I want to make sure that by the time you're finished with the video, you have a very good understanding of how you could duplicate the process and use it yourself. So we got part 1, which goes over setting up everything for the toolpaths. Part 2, which is going to go over everything up to and including cutting the board. What I'm not going to cover is the sanding and finishing process or any of that, because it would just make the video too long and it would take away from the focus of how you cut and pour the epoxy. If you would like to see how I sand and finish the board, go ahead and give me a comment and I'll consider making that as my next video or one in the near future. So let's go ahead and go over what we will cover in this video. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over setting up each of the individual toolpaths. And remember, there are 5 colors in this. There's a surfacing toolpath, there's a toolpath for putting a roundover on the boards, and there's a toolpath for cutting out the board. So there's about 7, 8 toolpaths we're going to be setting up, and I'll go into detail about the depths of cut and how I set those things up, and the sequence by which I set them up. I will also then, while I'm going through how I set up all the toolpaths, I'll go through a process of showing you how you can preview the final graphic, I'll call it, how you can preview the epoxy pours so that you can see what the colors will lay out like. And after we do that, we're going to go into physically cutting each of the toolpaths on my CNC. I'll demonstrate the cutting process. I won't make you go through real time. I'll be speeding up the toolpaths so that they're reasonable time frames, or at least what I think is reasonable, explaining key points with those toolpaths. And then after I cut a given toolpath, like a white or blue or red color, I'll pour that color and I'll talk you through what I'm doing while I pour it, why I'm stirring it, what colors I use, etc. And then at the end of the video, I will summarize what it was that were key points I thought should be learned. Throughout the video, you'll see me have little pop-up notes and try to put in tips and tricks that I've picked up as I've gone through these projects. With that, let's go ahead and get started in the video and start the learning process. In this part of the video, I'm coming back into the software where I left off. As you recall, I left off in part 1 with all of the layers being laid out and the flag ready to apply toolpaths to. And if we come over here to the layers section, I had all of these various demo layers. I no longer need those demo layers because I've already, if I come over here, got the other layers that I originally applied toolpaths to. Let's lay those out real quickly. So this is the guide, and you can see it matched up with the guide right there. This is the white pocket, which matched up. These are the red stars, and you can see that I pulled those in just a little bit more than I did in my demo. I didn't need to, they would have been fine. I've got the blue star field. I've got the stars. I've got the gold border. I've got the black text. I've got the text on the curve. I've got all of the sections that I needed, a dip section that I didn't go through yet, an outside tray cutout, and the surfacing. So with all of those on, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the layers that I created during our demo, and that'll make it easier and more efficient for me to go through this video, because I've already set up the toolpaths and I'm just going to reset them up and show you the way I did it. I like to work on my board, on my CNC, with the board going along a fence. I have a fence right along the left side and a fence on the bottom so that I can always put it into the right location. So I like to do the carves and everything else on my board going the long way. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to take all of these vectors. I'm going to hit group them all, and I wanted to make sure I had everything on, and I do. And now I'm going to hit the 9 key 2 times and rotate it around. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to the design. I'm going to go to the create tab, and I'm going to put the 12.375 inches up here in the X direction and the 24 inches in the Y direction. I'm going to leave the thickness the same. This will be the actual final thickness. Hit OK. And then I need to go ahead and center all of this on this board. So the way I can center it is I can go 2 ways. I can go to center over here, which will open up this, or I can simply hit the F9 key. So now that I have the vectors all centered, this vector here looks like it accidentally was turned on. Oh, because of the grouping. It was, so the way this happened was, this was apparently the default layer when I grouped it. So now I'm going to ungroup back onto the original layers, and then I can turn this off. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to hit ungroup. Back onto original layers, and now you can see if I turn that text demo off, that stays off. So there's your lesson learned. Make sure you have it on the correct layer when you group it. Now that we are in the vertical direction, I'll call it, I'm going to go ahead and start laying out my toolpaths. My first step will be to go ahead and turn off all of the vectors that and that way I'll have control over the toolpaths I create. Let's turn on the toolpath palette. And the first vector, or the first toolpath I want to create, is to flatten the board before I start putting any epoxy on it. So I want to start with a flat board, and I'm going to take the surfacing vector. This is a vector that I created. I'm not sure I did it in the video, but I have a standard set of vectors I use. I will create another video on that to show you how I go about using that. But the basic concept is I have a 2.5 inch radius surfacing bit called a slab slayer from Rip Precision Tools that I use. You could use a 1 inch, 2 inch, whatever you have. I'll share with you the information on my bit. It works great for epoxy work. I've set up this toolpath as a profile pathway. So that's when I'm going to use a profile path, and it's going to start up here, and it's going to go around this path, and I'm going to put it right on this path that I've set up. So the bit always starts out past the wood, it turns past the wood, and then it goes through it. So let's start with a profile toolpath. I'm going to cut to a depth of 1/2 mil. So if I wanted to, if I didn't know what that was in inches, I could put 0.5 for 1/2 mil. I can put times I equal, and that will give me the equivalent inches. So I'm cutting 1/2 mil at a time. I'm using a 2.5 inch diameter bit. I'm only going to go 1 pass because I'm only going down, like I said, 1/2 mil. I'm going to place the toolpath on the vector, and I don't need a separate last pass, don't need any tabs, I don't need any of this information. I'm going to use an open vector in this case because they're not closed vectors. I'm going to turn those off. I'm going to select surfacing, and notice I said it was an open vector, associate with toolpath, hit close, and I'm going to call this surface. So I hit calculate, and now I will turn this to a color so we can tell when it's done that it's actually surfaced. And we'll go ahead and preview this toolpath. Now let me point out that after you surfaced this board, it's going to be whatever you took off thinner. So if you, in your original design, let's go back up here, you had put 0.7 and you actually took off some thickness from that, you would want to change this by whatever it was. In my case, the final thickness is going to be 0.7, so I'm not going to bother to change that because that's not, this is just a demo. Hit cancel, but that's what you'd want to do to be accurate when you get to the cutout part. It only matters on the cutout part of your toolpath. So now we've got this board surface. Let me reset this preview so that's not in the way of our color. The next layer over here, the next toolpath, remember we said we're going to cut, was the white toolpath or the white pocket. So I'm going to turn on the white vectors right here. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to use a vCarve toolpath with that. You can see that popping up right there. And let me turn off the surfacing vectors. I don't need those anymore. They'll just create confusion for you. And I'm going to put a flat depth of 0.15 for my first pour. I'm going to use the equivalent of a 15-degree V-bit. I've switched over about 6 months to a year ago to a tapered ball nose that I use. It's a little stronger. I like the way it cuts a little bit better. It's an upcut, and it's a 12.4 degree bit, which is even tighter than the 15-degree V-bit. But if you've listened to other videos that Shane and I have put out, you'll know we normally recommend a 15-degree V-bit. For the clearance bit, I'll use this downcut bit. I go ahead and use this offset toolpath. The only thing I worry about with offset toolpaths is potential tool marks on the bottom, and we'll be filling with epoxy, so it doesn't matter. I come down here. I don't need any different vector start points. I don't need to change anything with my Safe Z. I don't need anything in a ramp or anything else. So I'm going to come over here to the selector, and I'm going to pick the white pockets. Now this time I have a closed vector. I'm going to associate with the toolpath. I'm going to come up here to the white pocket. I'm going to uncheck the surfacing, which it was on before, hit close. And I'm going to call this WH for white. I hit calculate, and now we've got the toolpath predicted, and we're ready to move forward. I hit preview visible. And I will change that toolpath to white so we can see it real quick. Okay, so that's the white. I'm going to reset that preview. Now we're going to set up the red toolpath. So I'm going to turn on the red stripes. I'm going to turn off the white so I don't accidentally select those. I'm going to go to a regular pocket toolpath versus a vCarve engraving toolpath. Because we're carving directly into the white, we don't have to worry about overlap that you saw in the previous fundamentals. There will be no overlap. It's going straight down into the white. So I'm going to use a 1/8 inch O-flute bit. I'll put all of the bit numbers in the video description at the end of the video, and I'll try to remember to put a note in here when I'm editing the video so you can see which bits I'm using for which toolpaths. I'm going down 0.125 inches, which is slightly less than 0.15. I'm going to still use the offset toolpath. Everything else looks good. Now I'm going to select the correct vectors, which are the red stripes. Unclick white, go to red, hit close, hit calculate. Well, before I hit calculate, I want to make this red. Hit calculate, and let me select a red color for the preview on that. Hit preview. And you can see the red. So now let's go to the next toolpath, which is the blue field and stars. We've already got the white poured, we've already got the red poured, and now we're setting up the blue toolpath. And I would normally set all these toolpaths up ahead of time, but you can do them as you pour them. So I'm going to turn on the blue field, and I'm going to turn on the blue on the stars, because it'll become important that I engrave between these two to get the white stars to pop out. Come over here to the 3D. I'm going to come back up to the vCarve engraving toolpath. And in this case, it's critical you use a vCarve toolpath because you want the V-pit to get down in to the corners and not have nice sharp edges. Also, we will be overcutting these red stripes here on the right as you see it. The other thing that you want to check real quickly is to make sure, since you were using an 1/8 inch bit, the edge will be a radius bit. So you want to make sure that when you carve this V bit, it's past the radius section of the bit. So this will look like a nice square set of vectors. So now that we've got this, we want to go again to 0.125. I'm going to use the same V bit I did before, 15 degree, or this Amana tapered ball nose. I'm not going to use this bit here that's left over from the last time. I'm going to remove that bit, and I'm going to select my O-flute bit, which happens to be an Amana bit. And I'm going to go to Selector, Closed Vectors, and I'm going to turn off the red star. I'm going to hit the blue field and the stars, and that way it'll engrave in between all the stars. Hit Close. Go over here, change this name to blue, because that's the blue pour. I'm going to hit Calculate now. It won't let me turn that into blue, just because. Preview Visible. Now, one of the things you notice, this red coming over here, don't worry about that. That's because these are both at the same depth. So in summary, we've got a 0.15 inch depth, a 0.125 inch depth, and a 0.125 inch depth. The next toolpath that we want to set up would be the gold border. So let me turn these two off. Let's turn on the gold border. The gold border will be another vCarve engraving toolpath. All of the same parameters, same bits as we used before, same bit as I used before. Change this to gold. I'll just put GL, select, associate with toolpath, blue, blue, turn on gold, hit close, hit calculate, preview visible. And there we go. If we want to put a color to that, we can put a color to it. And that's a preview. And so now we have the gold border, and everything you see underneath that looks like wood is actually white epoxy. Then the next thing I'm going to do is set up a toolpath for the black text. So let me turn on the black text. Next thing I do is I select the vCarve toolpath. Same properties we've used before, 0.0, 0.125, and you'll notice that I'm now going to turn this off. I'm going to do black text, associate, close. I'm going to put this as black, hit calculate, preview. And I will change this to black, change this to black, and you can see our text. So the next toolpath we need is to set up the roundover for the dip and the outside tray. And I could set this up as two different methods, but I want to set it up at the same time, so I'm going to turn on the dip section, and I'm going to turn on the outside tray section of the vectors that I previously set up. And the first thing I want to do is a roundover toolpath. And the way I do a roundover toolpath, I have a video on that. I'll put a card up in the corner that you can see, and in the video description. I use a profile toolpath for my roundovers. I start at 0.0. I go down to a depth of 0.375 based on the bit that I'm using. I select the proper bit, which is a plunge roundover bit that I have. So white side 2052 roundover bit. I go to the outside, and based on what I know about the bit, I hit minus 0.0 0.25 inches. For my offset allowance, I'll change that to conventional. I like the way that cuts better. I don't need a separate last pass. I do not need any tabs. I do want a ramp, so I'm going to add a ramp to that. 0.7 inches is a good ramp, or I could put in 1 inch and safe Z, nothing there. Vector selection. In this case, I think to grab them by hand. So I'm going to grab this one, and I'm going to grab this one. And because it's a profile toolpath, it'll know it cuts on the inside of this vector and on the outside of this vector. And I'm going to put Roundover here. Hit calculate. And now that's the toolpath. If I come over here and I want to see how it's going to look, you can see that bit, because it's a roundover, goes over the edge here, goes over the edge here. And let's go ahead and preview what that's going to look like. As I said, I do have a video on how to set up roundover bits. The next thing I want to do after I've got the roundover is to put a pocket in here. So I'm going to go ahead and use a pocket toolpath. I'm going to go down 0.375 is where that other bit left off. I'm going to remove this bit. I'm going to select a ball nose that I like, a Rip Precision ball nose that is a 3/8 inch ball nose. I'm going to select that one, and I'm going to put ball nose 375, hit calculate. And I grabbed the wrong vector, so we're going to go back over here. Selector, close, dip section, close, calculate. And now we have the pocket there. Let's preview that. So the next toolpath and the final toolpath is the Cutout toolpath. So we're going to go ahead and get a profile toolpath. I'm going to start at 0.375 inches deep, because that's where I left off with the roundover. And it was a plunge roundover. I want to go all the way through to the bottom of the tray. So I will go ahead and say Z, or you could use thickness, minus 0.375. And by doing that, it's going to start at 0.375, and it's only going to calculate the depth that's remaining for the thickness. I'm going to select spiral down cut in this case. Hit select. We're on the outside right, which is what we want. No allowance offset. Let's go ahead and do a separate last pass of, say, 0.02. I'm not going to put tabs in for this demo so you can see it, but before I actually do the tool cut on the video, you will see that I have tabs put in. I'm going to have a ramp, and it's going to be 0.5 inches. And I'm going to say Cutout, selector, outside tray, hit close, hit calculate, hit preview. And there we have the tray. Now that we have the serving board all cut out, let's go into a couple other tips and tricks and things that I do before I physically carve this on the CNC. So the first thing I want to do is, now we've got all the actual depths of this surface cut. But what I want to show you is how you could preview this. You can't preview this flag with all of the colors at the actual depths of cut. So let me show you a trick. One way, obviously, is you can say, hey, I know this is all white and the rest is all pretty correct. You can see that it doesn't look that good. So if you let me go over how you might be able to preview this flag if you so desired. Let's go to each toolpath. Remember what they were to begin with, but now I'm going to take this one and I'm going to set this one to 0.03, since this is the overriding one that everyone's going to do. And you're going to see, to get the colors to show up, you need to go just a little deeper for each color that matters. So since we're at 0.03, hit calculate, and I'm going to reset the preview on this. So we're starting fresh. And now if I preview that, I'm only 0.03 inches deep. So the next one, let's go to that. And I know that on the previous one, I was 0.03 inches deep. So now on this one, I just want to go another, let's say 0.02 inches. Oops, 0.02 inches. All I want to do is get deep enough to get the color in there, hit calculate, and we're going to preview the visible. So the white was 0.03. This one starts at 0.03 and goes to 0.02. So now what you can see is you can see the white and the red. And the next one we want to do is blue. And for the blue, what I want to be able to do is go down past the red and past the white, because that is where I left off. So I want to go 0.05, and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go let's go 0.03 depth. That takes to 0.08 altogether. Hit calculate. And now we'll preview the blue. And now you're getting to see exactly how the flag is going to lay out. So what you see here is you've got the blue cutting straight across here, nice and crisp, and the red coming out past the edge of the flag because we haven't done our gold yet, and the edge coming out here. And now the next thing that we want to do, and you notice the red is a little beyond the blue here, so you're not worried about it. The next one we're going to do is the gold. We're going to start that one at 0.08, which is where we had left off with the other ones. And we're just going to take this one to 0.05, let's say. All right, and that actually calculate that. And then we're going to preview that one. And now you've got a good picture of how the epoxy inlay is going to lay out. Nice square edges here, nice square edges here, all along. Everything looks perfect. And that's how you can go preview what your colors are going to look like. Remember this, though, that after you do the preview, you have to go back in and put the real depths in there, or you won't have the results you wanted. So that's what I'm going to do real quick now, is I'm going to go put the real depths in and put this on speed up. Okay, that's it. We've recalculated all of the toolpaths. Go ahead and reset the preview. Do one more quick preview of all the cuts, simply to make sure that I've got everything reset and everything's cutting through where I needed to cut through. One of the things you'll notice, or I noticed when I was resetting the depths, is I never did do the black text, but you get the gist of how you can preview it, and I'm not going to go back and do that. Preview visible. So now what you'll notice is you won't see the red, the blue, or the black, because they're all at 0.125 and the white is at 0.15, so it doesn't go in and cut into the white, which is what you wanted. So there you are. We know that all the toolpaths are cut right. We know that the colors are less than the white, and we have a good feeling for that. If we wanted to, we could do another quick review. If we're not comfortable, to make sure, we'll go red, blue, gold, black, and the rest, everything except white. And then you should be able to see the colors. And now we're back where we were before we did the cutout. And you'll notice that, at least I did when I watched the preview, that the cutout was happening before the pocket, which is not something you'd want. So I'm going to move this pocket up above the cutout. I'm not sure when that happened. I must have made an adjustment after the fact. And now we've got just how we want it, and we're ready to rock and roll. And what I would do is I would then go take each of these toolpaths that I did, and I would save them on a USB drive, or however you do that with your machine. Me, I save these on a USB drive and take them to my controller, my handheld controller from my Laguna. Let me turn off this noise here. in the vectors, and I can do that by simply turning that off there. One of the things, if you saw my video on Zing off the machine bed versus a material, that I will do after I've saved all of these to my thumb drive, is to go back and change my profile cut. And I need to do two things with this profile cut. One is I need to add a tabs to it, and the other one is I want to make this one toolpath I zero off the machine bed versus a material surface to preserve my spoiler board. So the way I have to do that now is I have to go in and I have to set the material setup to machine bed, hit OK. It's going to ask me, you need to change all the toolpaths because they've all been calculated off the surface. Well, I don't want to change all of the toolpaths. I just want, so I'm going to hit no. I'm just going to want to change this one that I'm going to redo. So everything looks good up here. All of our settings are correct. The only thing I need to add to it is I need to add a tab to it. The ramp is good. And now I'm going to calculate it, and the only thing that's different is I'm going to add tabs, and I'm going to zero this off the machine bed, and I need to remember that. But since that's my habit these days, zeroing off machine bed for cut-through cuts, I'll be able to do that, and you'll see that in the video. So now we'll go ahead and preview that cut. And you can see that I've got the tabs there now. I'm ready to now save this toolpath to my USB drive, and I have all the toolpaths on my USB drive that I need to cut out this project. Before I actually start going to the machine and using all these toolpaths, let me do one last thing so that I don't forget. I want to go back over here and reset the toolpath to the material surface, and I don't want to recalculate any of the toolpaths because they're all calculated at what I want them to be. Now I have everything set up the way I want, and if I want to get rid of all these down here, I can. Remember, this was just for the demo. Let's go to the machine and start cutting out and pouring epoxy. We just finished doing the section in this video on how I set up each of the toolpaths. Now we're going to move into the part where I go through and I demonstrate each of the cuts. Because I didn't have this full video and how it would be constructed in mind when I started this video, I'm going to put this section in and I'm going to go through an overview real quick about what you're going to see. For each of these toolpaths, what you'll see as pre-recorded material, do the cutting of the material with the color, and then you'll see me pour the color, and then I'll come back after the color's hard, and you'll see me carve the next color, and we'll work through the process in that way. I also want to talk about the standard setup, so let me do that right now because I will not cover that for each of the toolpaths as I'm cutting them. So let's take a look. What you see here is a representative sample of the board. I've already cut it, so I can't show you the board, but this is about the same width and it's a little shorter. But let me show you the typical setup for each of my toolpaths that I'm going to cut, and keep that in mind even though I may not cover that when I'm showing the carving of the board. The first thing I did, and I didn't have a video of that, was I surfaced the board to make sure it was totally flat. Once I surfaced the board, I went ahead and put an X right here in the left corner. And I don't know whether you will see that in the videos or not. And that's the place I'm going to zero every one of my toolpaths off, is the same spot each time. My XY, 0, is controlled by these two fences. So I have a fence along the left, a fence down here at the bottom. I clamp my clamps in here, I clamp that clamp down here, so it's always going back in the same spot, and I never change my XY 0. So I have my XY 0 here, my Z 0 in this spot, so that I won't be changing where I'm zeroing the bits and always have a common reference. I will do that for all the toolpaths except when I go to cut through, and you saw that when I go to cut through the board to finally cut it out, I will zero off the material bed to prevent creating scars and big divots in my bed. I've got a video out there on why I do that, and I'll put a card in the corner of this video, and I'll also put something in the description of why I use the bed for when I'm doing cut-through cuts. So now you know how I'm going to set up every toolpath, and I'm not going to cover that for every time I'm setting up the carving. The next thing you might note is many of the times you'll see me have this dust shoe on and you can't physically see the tool carving, and that's because it just makes a mess if I don't do it. I do try to have some of the cuts where I can show you without the dust shoe, but just realize that the dust shoe is a necessity in some cases when I just don't want to spend the extra time cleaning up. One other thing I'd like to bring up. You may see me occasionally interrupt in the video with a little excerpt as I'm putting the video together and acknowledging things. Recognize that this video is put together after the fact, and so I tried to capture everything I could, but every once in a while I'll step into the video and try to explain what's going on. I will also do a lot of narration instead of talking while I'm doing the cuts themselves, just to make it easier for you to understand, and I will try to cut out all of the extraneous dust collector noise, CNC noise, etc. Another thing I want to point out is I went against most of my advice where we talk about having a pre-coat with your colors to make sure that you don't get bleeding. So try not to get confused about that. I was in an extra hurry when I was trying to do this carve, and normally what I would do is I would put a pocket, pour with clear. At a minimum, I would brush clear on it, but I normally pour a clear coat, let that dry, and then get started. I was really under a time crunch to try to get this done by the time I wanted it done. I talked it through with Shane, and we talked about the colors I was using and about the process I was going to use. And Shane said, well, brother, just go ahead and try it without a clear pocket or a clear coat. The worst that can happen is you'll have to recarve it out, but let's see how it works. So that's what I did. I didn't even bother to pre-coat this with clear. I don't recommend that, but that's what I did, and that's what you'll see. I carve out the white pocket, and then I go ahead and pour the white right into it. And the rationale was I'm going to put a gold border around it, so if it bleeded at all to the outside, then I could have used a clear coat on the outside. Instead, what I did was, you'll see when I cut the gold, and then I went ahead and did a pre-coat by brushing in some resin and letting it harden, and then I poured. So that's how I pre-coated the outside to make sure I didn't have any bleed to come out. A little different than I normally recommend, and I was a little concerned about bubble generation in the white, and it turned out that it worked okay. So I just wanted to make that up front. When you don't see me put a clear coat of resin in, or if you don't see me brush it on, it's because I didn't. I took a risk because of time, and in this case the risk paid off, but it's not what I would normally recommend, and I want to state that right up front. With that, let's go ahead and get started into the demo of how I carved and poured each of these colors, and how I carved the roundover, and how I cut out the board. One other thing is I will typically speed up those toolpaths dramatically. There's no reason for you to just watch that thing go round and round. So I'll speed it up from toolpaths that took anywhere from 5 to 30 minutes into 5 and 10 seconds. And hopefully that'll keep your interest a little bit more. With that, let's go ahead and get started in the part of me showing you how I use those toolpaths to cut and then pour the epoxy. I'm using eye candy pigment here. So this one is Satori White. It's a paste, and so it goes a long ways. So this, what we'll do is we'll take some paste, and I will put it on the stick, and then I'll put the stick in the epoxy to get it off and kind of swirl it around. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put just a little Say white in it, which will give it just a little metallic or mica. So this is a mica powder versus a paste. And I'm also going to put a little of icicle to give it a little more sparkle. So you can see that's pretty opaque and it's got sparkle in it. So I like how that's coming. Yeah, I think that's going to look good. Looks like that calculation is going to be pretty darn good. Okay, we poured this piece at about 12 and it's now almost 5 o'clock, 5 hours later. I have not much hope of it being ready to carve, but we'll just take a look at how soft it is. So it's hardening up, but it's still too soft. Yeah, it's still a little gummy here. Probably another 2 to 3 hours. All right, so now it's time for the next color, which is red. I'm going to be using Epoxy Fire Truck Red. As you know, normally I use eye candy, but I still have this left over and it's a beautiful color. And then mix all red. I need just around 4 ounces. I might have a little left over, and if I do with the red, I'll put them in these hearts. All right, so we're going to put some Fire Truck Red in here. This is a pretty deep, dark red. Looks beautiful. Looking good. So now I'll put just a couple drops of Mix All Red. Just a couple drops in there. There we go. That's going to be pretty. Now when I'm filling this up, remember that I'm filling it so it swells just a little bit above the white, which means it'll spill over sometimes, and I'm doing that because the epoxy is going to shrink. And so now what I'm doing is I'm going in and I'm making sure that the corners are filled, that there's no air pockets in the corners. Okay, and now I like to go just along the edge to break any bubbles that may be forming. Although with the epoxy against epoxy, there really isn't a worry of that too much. So this little bit that's left, I'm gonna put some mold release in a couple of these molds. Let it sit for just a couple minutes. We'll see if we can make ourselves just a couple little trinkets. All right, I'll come back in 20 minutes and check for bubbles and then start swirling a little bit. No need to swirl right now because it won't do any good, but give me about 20 minutes. Okay, let's go ahead and see if there's enough in here to fill this little thing up here. Okay, about half of it. That'll be a cute little trinket. right, we've got the white and the red poured today of my new project. I'm making a serving board with an American flag and some area for dip over here when it's said and done. So we've got the white, and the red was poured about an hour ago, 45 minutes ago, and it's in the curing process. And the leftover red that I had is right there. Now that the red got hard, it's time to start into carving the blue field and the stars, and I'm starting out with my V-bit or my tapered ball nose, and then I'll switch over to my 1/8 inch O-flute bit to do the clearance. I just had to throw this scene in there because I think it looks pretty cool. I still like watching my CNC cut even after all of these years, and I think that other people into CNC like the same thing, so I hope you are enjoying this video. This is how clean it looked when I got all said and done. I'm going to blow the air out, get any little fuzzies or anything from the carving. Okay, it looks level. We will go ahead and mix up 2 ounces of blue. I'm going to be using Azure blue. Okay, so that's 5 pumps of each. And that gives me right around 2 ounces, which should be, according to the spreadsheet, good enough. Okay, so I'm trying to see how opaque it is. It looks pretty opaque, so I think I'm going to be good there. I love that blue color. So what you see me doing here is I'm going around each of these little star sections to try to make sure that it's got a good bond with the star. It's kind of a pain in the butt, but I found if I don't do this, sometimes we'll get air bubbles right around the star. The hard part is making sure that you get across them all and realizing that you've actually touched each of the stars, because there's so many of them. How many are there? That's right, 50. All right, time to let it sit for 15-20 minutes and come back and stir it and check it about every 15 to 20 minutes for the next couple hours as it sets up. With that, let's kick back and enjoy some music while we watch this thing carve for the next few seconds. Here we go. I have to admit, I enjoy watching the detail of this bit when it carves. Now what you see me doing is going ahead and doing a pre-coat with some clear epoxy and getting ready to pour the gold so that it doesn't bleed. Now that the pre-coat's done, it's time to go ahead and pour in the gold colored epoxy. It doesn't take very much. I'm using Mixol ME1 and Fire Dots Gold 1848. Then I'm ready to go on and take over the black and start mixing in the black for the text. For the black, I'm using Black Diamond pigment powder. So there is the tray. It's a 5-color inlay. They're all hard. And so now it's time to surface it, and that'll be my next step, is to surface that and then shape it up and then put some finish on it. And then be gentle with it this afternoon so I don't spill anything greasy on it or anything until the finish actually cures, but I want to have it for this afternoon. So stand by. I'll be surfacing that in a little bit. At this time, we've zeroed the surfacing bit off the left corner like we had of all the other times. And what we're doing is we're going to go back and forth several times, I think 3 or 4, going down a 1/2 millimeter at each time. Hard to kind of see sometimes with the dust shoe, but with the surfacing bit, it will really throw that epoxy all over the place. So let's go. The next toolpath after everything was surfaced was my roundover bit. You may remember I use a Whiteside 2052 bit. It's a plunge roundover, and I have another video that talks about how to use these. I'll put information inside the corner of this video and in the description. After I had my roundover in place, I went ahead and did the pocket for the dip tray. The next step for cutting out this tray was to zero the bit off of the spoiler board. I didn't catch that on the video, so I wanted to point that out because I made a point of it when we were going through the software setup of the Toolpaths. The other thing you saw was the bit plunged down 0.375 inches before it started carving, and that was, it could get past the plunge roundover depth of 0.375. When all was said and done, I was really happy with how this project turned out, and those roundovers cut nice and clean. The pocket was clean. Everything turned out just great. Here's how it looked after cutting those tabs away and a little bit of sanding. We just completed the video, everything from setting up the Toolpaths, what you need to do to be able to preview your colors of your epoxy, how you cut each toolpath, and how you pour each color. Along the way, I provided tips and tricks and things that I thought were key to the process. Here's a couple of those things I hoped you walked away with. Number one, how you physically set up each toolpath based on the layers that you established in the previous video. Number two, how you set up the colors in a way that you can preview them before you start cutting them and get a good confident feel that they're going to work out the right way. The depth of cuts for each toolpath and why you put those depths of cuts the way you do. Another tip that I shared was something I made a previous video on, which will be listed in the description, and that was how on the last cut, when I cut through the serving board, I switched from zeroing off the top of the board to the bottom of the board. I also shared a few shortcuts for things about setting up your toolpaths. As an example, using formulas or changing from metric to inches. I discussed how I took an exception to my normal pre-coating with epoxy. I hope you understand, always is never always, never is never never, and there's always exceptions to the rules when you're going through an art project or any other project. You have to use your fundamentals to decide what you're going to do, and that's what I did in the pre-coat. After talking with some folks, they said they'd be interested in a copy of this file, so I will place a copy of this file. It will be a Vectric vCarve Pro version 12 file on my website. I'll put a link in the description if interested in getting a copy of this file for you to carve yourself. In this case, it's not a free download, so I don't want anybody fooled. If you go there, there will be a small charge for the file. With that, let's go on with the finishing up of this video. I do hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you picked up some good tips and tricks. If you're interested in a video on how I sanded and finished, I mean, the sanding part is kind of boring always, but you may be interested in how I finish these projects, please put something in the comments. If you like the video, please give me a like. You know the routine. Give me a comment, share the video, and if you want to see future videos when I come out with them, make sure you subscribe. With that, have a great day. Until we meet in this medium again, I'm wishing you all the very best.